My name is Elise Hartman, and for many years, I believed I understood what it meant to build something lasting. A career, a marriage, a family. At 32, I thought I had woven a solid life, a growing, sustainable fashion brand in Portland, a husband who always said he was proud of me, and a family I tried to keep close, even though I always felt like a stranger in my own home. After my mother passed, I tried to piece everything back together. I let my father and stepmother move into Hartman House, the home my mother left behind, the place once filled with her sketches and dreams. I hoped love could mend the tears that grief had carved, but I was wrong. Everything began to unravel, stitch by stitch. When I learned the truth, Liam Brooks, my husband, had betrayed me with Sophie, my half-sister. And when the result of that betrayal was a child, my family dragged me into court, demanding that I pay to support that baby. Imagine this, standing in a packed Portland courtroom, watching my father avoid his daughter's eyes, my stepmother smiling faintly behind her lawyer, and my husband, the man who once held my hand at the altar, now holding the hand of my own sister. They thought they could silence me, that I would crumble the way they always expected. But I didn't. I stood up, my hands shaking, but my voice steady. I don't need to prove I'm innocent. I only need to show the world how guilty they are. Before I reveal their plan, I want to know, where are you watching this video from? And what time is it for you right now? Stay. Because the truth of this story is more painful than the betrayal itself. Because if you're still here, maybe you know what it feels like to be stabbed in the back by your own family. Share your thoughts below. Now, let's go back to that house. After the trial, when everyone had left, the room held nothing but the sound of Portland rain tapping softly against the window frame. I remained seated alone, my hands gripping the cold stack of documents. In that silence, something pulled me back to the distant years, to the place where the first lies were whispered inside this very house. I used to think that if I behaved better, they would love me more. I believed that when I was just a child, the day my mother died, Hartman House became strangely hollow. The white curtains she hung still fluttered in the wind, and the scent of lavender in her room lingered faintly. My father, Gregory Hartman, did not cry. He simply stood by the window, a glass of whiskey untouched in his hand. I thought his grief was too heavy to turn into sound. I did not know that silence was the way he learned to forget us. Only 6 months later, he remarried Nadine, a woman with a sweet smile, but eyes cold as glass. She moved into Hartman House carrying a strong perfume that swallowed the lavender my mother left behind. The paintings, the fabrics, the sketches, everything of my mother's was moved to the attic. That winter, Portland was so cold, the breath turned into white threads. I would sit inside my mother's old room, clutching the pencil she once used. My hands were numb, but I was afraid that if I let go, I would drop the last pieces of her I still had. Then Sophie was born, a child with bright eyes, and all the love in the house flowed toward her. I was 12 when I heard Nadine say, "Elise, you are the older sister. You must know how to sacrifice." From then on, I cleaned, did laundry, and looked after the baby whenever they went out. One time, Sophie spilled milk over one of my mother's old sketches, and I burst into tears. Nadine did not look at Sophie, she looked at me. If you had put it away properly, this wouldn't have happened. And my father simply nodded, as if it made perfect sense. Since the day Sophie was born, I was no longer called my father's daughter. As time passed, Sophie grew up spoiled. Every mistake somehow became my fault. Sophie forgot her homework. I didn't remind her. Sophie got a bad grade. I didn't tutor her. Sophie cried. I must have upset her. I slowly learned to stay silent. Every time I spoke, Nadine would glare at me with eyes sharp as a blade, and my father would lower his head, avoiding the gaze of the two women. Once, I heard them talking when they thought I was asleep. "Nadine, that girl is stubborn. We need to teach her her place. Gregory, fine. As long as she doesn't cause trouble. They didn't know I was lying there in the dark. And that sentence became the first cut that made me never believe in family again. I learned to walk softly, speak quietly, and avoid Nadine's eyes. Each night, I curled myself on the staircase, listening to the clinking of wine glasses in the living room as if they were celebrating the fact that I had learned how to disappear. Every apology I made only pleased them more. The day Nadine decided to replace all the curtains in the house, I stood on the stairs watching. The white curtains my mother hung disappeared, replaced by pale pink fabric, heavy and suffocating like a barrier against the light. My mother's photos were taken down, replaced with a new one, Gregory, Nadine, and Sophie, the three of them smiling brightly. I was not in it. That night, I went downstairs for water. I heard Nadine's voice drifting from the living room. Now this house finally belongs to us. That sentence pulled the last thread in my heart until it snapped. I went to my room, opened the wooden cabinet, and took out the old sketchbook my mother left me. On the last page, she once wrote, "If one day you feel erased from this place, weave a place that belongs to you." The day the pink curtains were hung, Hartman House stopped being my home. From then on, I stopped crying. I drew. The first lines were shaky and distorted, but they slowly became the only way I could breathe. Every line I sketched felt like stitching a piece of my skin back together. I never knew pain could become a habit. Every night, I would light my desk lamp, open my sketchbook. Each line was a sentence I could not say aloud. That small room was the only world I could control. I made myself a promise. When I grow up, I will leave this place. I will never let anyone make me small again. But I did not know that vow would be the blade that cut the final string between me and them, and also the very first thread that would weave the life I am paying the price for now. Because one day, they will come back and use love to reclaim everything, including me. I left Hartman House on a damp morning. When Portland was still covered in mist, no one saw me off. My father stood on the porch with his hands in his pockets, and Nadine looked outside as if she were watching someone take out the trash. Sophie was still asleep, or at least pretending to be. I had nothing but my 2 hands and a promise to myself. I carried a small suitcase, a few spools of thread, an old sewing machine, and my mother's sketchbook. As I stepped down the wooden steps, I heard the floorboards creak as if they were saying goodbye. I did not look back. The early morning breeze hit my face, carrying the damp scent of moss and metal, the smell of a new beginning. The first months were ruthless. I rented a tiny room near the artist district in Hawthorne, where every night echoed with music from an old cafe. During the day, I worked at a tailor shop that had existed for 30 years, under the guidance of Mrs. Marianne Foster, who once was my mother's friend. Marianne never asked about my past. She simply looked at my roughened hands and said, "Good. You have the hands of someone who has endured." I started with mending clothes, trimming threads, hand-stitching, and learning how to choose recycled fabrics and natural dyes. The needle pricks left red marks on my fingertips, but I liked the feeling as if each stitch were sewing my heart back together, every scar on the fabric. I treated it as a piece of memory. Marianne taught me to respect the material, to understand that true beauty didn't lie in perfection, but in the places that had once been torn. I began to believe that maybe my own life could be sewn back together the same way. 3 years later, I gathered enough savings to open a small studio eco-atelier. It sat inside a repurposed warehouse, with white painted walls, low ceilings, and windows that leaked daylight. There was no big sign, only the smell of new fabric, the sound of scissors cutting, and the warmth of morning coffee. For the first time, I felt I was living, not just existing. I received small orders from local shops, and then from sustainable fashion bloggers. Marianne would occasionally stop by, bringing muffins and advice. Don't try to please the whole world, Elise. Do what brings you peace. I smiled. But deep inside, I was still afraid of being abandoned, a fear that stitched itself into every seam I made. Whenever rain fell against the window, I remembered the old house, the pink curtains, my stepmother's voice, and Sophie's gaze. I thought I had escaped the past, but it still sat there quietly among the rolls of fabric in my studio. Everything changed in the spring when I was 28. Echo Atelier was invited to join a sustainable fashion fair in downtown Portland. I displayed dresses dyed with natural pigments, soft, delicate, and breathing with memory. He walked up to my table with a smile warm enough and polite enough. "Liam Brooks," he said, offering his hand. "I've read about you before. The way you recycle old silk, it's remarkable." The light reflected in his eyes, and I saw in them the thing I had longed for my entire life, someone who truly saw me. He smiled as if he understood every tear inside me. We talked for a long time. About materials. About green fashion. About my mother, whom he only knew through the sketches she left behind. When the fair ended, he offered, "If you need someone to handle finances, I'd be happy to help." I didn't know why I trusted him instantly. Maybe it was the way he spoke. Or maybe his eyes resembled the look I had waited for from my father throughout my childhood. Liam became a companion to Eco Atelier, and to me, he brought new management systems, more efficient calculations, and late-night coffee sessions with expansion plans. Under the warm yellow lights in the studio, we laughed and talked, and I felt safe. Mariana looked at me, smiling with a mix of hope and doubt. "Be careful, Elise. Not everyone who touches your thread wants to sew in the same direction." I laughed. "I've learned to recognize that, Marianne." But the truth was, I never had. I trusted Liam, trusted that he saw me without anyone else's shadow. I didn't know that when he held my hand, that hand was already familiar with holding things that did not belong to him. I didn't know that smile would be the final thread pulling me back into a nightmare. In the 4th year of Echo Atelier, I appeared on the cover of Portland Living magazine. The photo was taken inside my studio. White light surrounding me, and the dress made from recycled fabric. They called me the woman who stitches dreams back together with her hands. Success doesn't save you from being looked down on. It only makes them more jealous. I thought that final camera click would prove I was finally enough. I didn't know it would only capture the moment I started disappearing. Liam stood beside me, his hand resting lightly on my shoulder. The perfect smile for the camera. Sophie, my sister, was there as well. Standing backstage in her role as marketing assistant, she joked, "You really do have a talent for being adored, Elise." I smiled back, unaware if her tone carried anything more than admiration. The flashes burst endlessly, and for a few seconds, I felt as if everyone was looking at me. But when the camera stopped, the room fell silent, and only I could see myself through the reflection on the glass. And perhaps I was no longer there at all. In the mornings, I arrived at the studio early, turned on the lights, brewed coffee, and adjusted the sewing machine. At night, when the staff left, I stayed listening to the needle piercing the fabric. Steady as a heartbeat, I began to feel like I was nothing more than a name on the signboard. Liam spoke less these days. He often stayed late with Sophie to discuss marketing strategies. I saw them laugh. Sharing little stories no longer meant for me. Each time I passed by, their voices stopped, like a door slamming shut in my face. One night, when I came back late, I saw the office lights still on. Through the glass, Liam was bent over the screen, and Sophie stood close beside him, her hand gently resting on his shoulder. I stood in the hallway for a long time, listening to the sewing machine echo from the studio, like the distorted heartbeat of my own chest. They came back as if they had never cast me out. My father, Gregory, and my stepmother, Nadine, appeared at the studio on a rainy afternoon. He said he wanted to check on me, but his eyes scanned every dress, every frame as if calculating what could bear the name Hartman again. They returned not to embrace me but to see what they could take. Nadine looked around. Her sweet smile painfully fake Elise. "You've done so well. The old house. I was thinking we could renovate it and call it Hartman Home Boutique." Perhaps I looked at her and answered slowly, "Thank you. But this brand doesn't need anyone else's name added to it." The words froze the air. My father looked down. Silent. Nadine's smile tightened. But in her eyes, something flickered ambition. The rain hammered against the metal roof, and I understood the past had never left me. It had only waited for the right silence to return. Sophie grew increasingly prominent. She was praised as the new face of sustainable fashion. And Liam, the man who once held my hand through countless exhausted nights, now mentioned her name before reporters. Once again, I watched myself disappear from my own life. I stood watching them at the press conference, the warm light washing over their faces, the two of them smiling, completing each other's answers, while I was nothing more than someone standing quietly at the side, like a decorative prop. That night, I returned to the studio and turned off all the lights except one small lamp. I sat in front of the sewing machine. My hands were trembling. The needle was sliding through the fabric. But I felt nothing. I sewed until the thread snapped. In that tiny click, I heard something inside me break as well. I stitched as if trying to hold together the parts of myself that were falling apart. But the more I sewed, the deeper the tear felt. On the weekend night, Portland rained again. I stood by the window, looking out the street blurred by car lights, reflected through the falling drops. In that dim shimmer, I saw Liam and Sophie leaving the studio together, shoulder to shoulder, sharing a quiet smile in the rain. Perhaps no one betrays you all at once. They simply pull their hand away from yours. Little by little, I touched the glass. Cold. I couldn't tell if it was the rain or my tears. I whispered, "Fine. If they want to forget me, I'll make sure they remember." Because in the darkness, I began to understand sometimes. Silence is the deepest declaration of war. That night, I didn't know. Their smiles were the beginning of the second betrayal. That night, Portland was raining again. I sat in front of the screen, the blue light casting a cold glow over my face, making everything look harsher than usual. On the table were the cost sheets Liam had sent over. The numbers looked perfect. So perfect that they were suspicious. No one can hide the trace of their sins. They just assume we're not sharp enough to see it. I discovered a sequence of strange payments under the name SB Design Co., creative consulting fees recorded consistently over the past 3 months. This company wasn't on our official partner list. At first, I thought it was an accounting mistake. But the instincts of someone who has been betrayed told me nothing is accidental. I printed all the statements and arranged them neatly. Every number was a misstitched thread. And I knew if I wanted to save the fabric called Eco Atelier, I had to cut away the first rotting portion. The next morning, I called Tessa Green, the assistant accountant, to the office. She was meticulous, loyal, and the only person I felt I could still trust. When I pointed to the line SB Design Co., Tessa frowned. The initials, SB. Sophie Brooks. My heartbeat slowed. Sophie Brooks, the new name my sister used in a recent marketing campaign. I remembered what Marianne once told me. A betrayer always leaves a signature. Even unconsciously, the initials of a traitor always begin with the name you once trusted. Tessa opened a few hidden files. The consulting fees were all approved using the electronic signature of Liam Brooks. He sat still. No screaming. No asking why. Because by then, I understood betrayal is never an accident. It is a plan, and they had planned this long ago. That evening, I didn't go home. I sat in the studio, surrounded by unfinished fabrics, listening to the rain hitting the metal roof. Liam and Sophie were still working late. Their laughter drifted through the frosted glass, soft as a craft knife. Sometimes the truth doesn't need to be spoken. It only needs to be seen long enough. I watched them through the glass as if I were watching my own past replay. My father, my stepmother, and me, the one standing outside the door of their fake happiness. I realized the script always repeats itself, only with different actors. The next morning, Liam walked in with his usual smile. He kissed my forehead lightly, the scent of a strange perfume brushing past. "You stayed up late working," I smiled. "Yes. Just adjusting a few things, to make them perfect." He didn't know that right then. I had already begun reconstructing the entire security system and backing up all accounting data. If they wanted to play perfect, I would show them what the perfect trap looked like, for 3 consecutive nights. I stayed at the studio. I changed all the account passwords and set the data backups to automatically send to my private email. Tessa helped me extract all hidden transactions, saving everything to an external drive. I had learned how to betray, but in a cleaner way. I learned to pretend I knew nothing. In front of Liam, I smiled at the right moments. In front of Sophie, I praised her just enough. I invited them to participate in the expansion plan, Eco Atelier Global, so they would think I still trusted them like before. While they were busy signing contracts that seemed beneficial, I added one small clause transferring all intellectual property rights to me. They didn't notice. When a beautiful trap is stitched shut with words, it makes no sound like a delicate seam on a silk gown. 3 weeks later, when Sophie proudly told me she was about to launch her own brand, I simply smiled. I already knew. The name SB Design was no longer just a lie, it was evidence. I had every transaction, every email, and every signature in my hands. That night, I went into the studio, placed the thick file on the table, and sat for a long time in front of the mirror. The light reflected my face, no longer the wounded one, but someone waiting for the right moment to strike. I opened the safe, placed all the evidence inside, and locked it. The soft click of the lock sounded like the final note closing the first chapter of my retaliation. Justice doesn't always need noise. It only needs the right timing. I exhaled. My heart beat steady like the rain outside. On the table, my mother's old sewing needle rested still, the thin steel reflecting the light like a cold smile. Just one more thread, and the trap will close gently, like the love they once pretended to have. If you're still listening to this, perhaps you're feeling something inside this story. Comment number 1, so I know you're still here with Elise and so I can thank you. The white light reflected off the glass table in the Eco Atelier conference room. Outside, Portland rain kept falling steady and cold. Everyone remained silent as I placed the thick file in front of me. When liars believe they are safe, that is the moment the truth walks into the room. "Thank you all for coming early," I said, my voice calm. "We need to review last quarter's transactions." Liam sat across from me, tapping his pen lightly on the table, pretending to be collected. Sophie sat beside him, her face pale but trying to smile. I opened my laptop and projected the data onto the large screen. The line SB Design Co. appeared clearly among the list. "What is this company?" I asked. No one answered. The only sound was the rain hitting the glass. Liam adjusted his tie, forcing a weak smile. "A creative consulting partner. Darling. A minor one." I didn't look at him. I simply clicked to the next slide, hidden transactions. Electronic signatures and unfamiliar account numbers appeared line by line. The room grew heavy. No one dared to move. The screen's glow washed over their faces, greenish, pale, revealing every flicker of fear. No accusations are needed. The numbers speak for themselves. I enlarged the expense sheet. Every consulting fee carried Liam's signature. Below his name was Sophie's co-approving the entries. "I had an independent auditor review this," I said slowly. "There is no such service as SB Design Co., registered in Oregon." The air froze. A board member whispered, "Oh my God." Liam still tried. "Elise, you're misunderstanding. This was a temporary transfer for reinvest. I cut him off temporary, when at the same time, a new brand with a logo identical to Eco Atelier appeared online registered under the name Sophie Brooks. The room held its breath. Sophie looked at me, lips trembling. You're mistaken. I tilted my head slightly, my smile never touching my eyes. I don't make mistakes anymore. I only have evidence. After the meeting, I called Liam into my office. No board. No. Sophie. Just the two of us and the large glass window reflecting two faces that once shared a bed. Betrayal doesn't need a knife, just a signature. He stood still, his voice low. I did this for us. I just wanted new opportunities. Elise. I walked to the desk, opened the safe, and pulled out the contract he had signed, the clause, transferring all intellectual property rights. You call this a new opportunity? I asked. He said nothing. The air thickened. I could hear the clock ticking, each slow beat like a countdown. Do you know what the worst part of betrayal is? I said, staring into his eyes. It's not the loss. It's realizing they were never sincere, not even in their lies. He sighed softly. You don't understand. Elise, I needed something bigger than love. I smiled. Right. And I needed something bigger than pain justice. 2 days later, Elise HQ welcomed a new guest, Maya Cortez, the commercial attorney who once represented Helen's trust. Her expression was sharp, her eyes cutting through every excuse. Justice may arrive late, but it never loses its way. I handed over the file I had prepared for weeks. Maya flipped through each page, nodding. This is enough to file for internal fraud, she said. And if they used company assets for personal gain, we will win completely. The news spread quickly. The board called an emergency meeting. Maya presented with steady confidence the actions of Mr. Fivelishin, Brooks and Ms. Hartman constitute shareholder violation and brand misappropriation. Across the table, Liam bowed his head. And Sophie didn't dare look up. Maya continued, her gaze slicing through them like a blade. And all copyrights have been legally transferred to Elise Hartman, the sole legitimate founder. I said nothing more. I only listened to the sound of Maya's pen scraping firmly across the record, a brief sound, but as loud as a verdict. The next day, Portland Business published a bold headline: ECO Atelier CEO exposes fraud within her own family. Online, images of Liam leaving the courthouse with his head down spread everywhere. Sophie cried, avoiding the cameras. Nadine and Gregory were summoned for investigation regarding misuse of trust funds. The house of lies always collapses when light shines through. Investors sent congratulatory letters to Elise Hartman for protecting the brand's transparency. I read every line, not with joy, but with relief. As I walked past the empty office, I saw Liam's old chair. Afternoon light poured over it, hollow and clean. Inside, I knew this wasn't victory. It was liberation. 3 weeks later, the court issued its official ruling. Liam Brooks was stripped of managerial rights and banned from business for 5 years. Sophie Hartman was ordered to return all fraudulently obtained shares. Maya stood beside me as the judge read the conclusion. White light streamed through the tall window, straight onto me. I don't need revenge. I only need the truth to stand with me. When the hearing ended, I walked out into the midday light. No more rain, only the sound of wind slipping through the trees. I paused at the steps, opened the file one last time, and watched the pages tremble gently in the sun. I had won not because they lost, but because I no longer had to be afraid. Justice doesn't make me happy, but it sets me free. When the doors of the Portland courthouse opened, the first thing I saw wasn't the blue sky or sunlight, but a crowd of reporters. Cameras flashing like a storm of lightning. Everyone wanted a piece of the story. A soundbite. An expression to turn into a headline. Sometimes the strongest answer is your silence. Ms. Hartman Elise, do you have any comments on your ex-husband's fraud? Do you think Sophie should face criminal charges? How do you feel after winning the case? I walked straight ahead, not looking left or right. The Portland wind swept through my hair, cold but gentle. All the questions shattered behind me, as if I no longer belonged to that noisy world. A young reporter ran after me, holding a microphone. Just one sentence. Elise. Just one. I paused for 1 second, turned my head, looked straight at them, and said nothing. The entire crowd froze. A short moment of silence, but it echoed louder than any answer. Then I turned away, walked down the steps, leaving them reaching into the empty air. That night, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Liam called. Sophie called. Nadine left a long voicemail, her voice trembling, calling me daughter. I didn't answer. Not one message. Not one word. Silence can be the most delicate punishment. Liam's message was long, like a rushed confession. Elise, please talk to me. Just 10 minutes. I'm sorry. Sophie wrote, I know you hate me, but I was wrong. Elise, I'm truly scared. I read everything. I didn't delete it. I didn't reply. I created a folder in my phone named Echoes. I placed every single message inside, to remember that the echoes of regret only appear when the other side realizes you no longer stand where you used to. Maya came to my house the next morning with 2 cups of hot coffee and a gentle smile. The first 14 days. Your silence is your shield. Maya said, everyone is watching how you respond. And silence is the wisest response. There are noises that only disappear when you stop trying to explain. I nodded. No argument. Because for the first time, silence wasn't just a weapon, it was freedom. I returned to the studio. The sound of the sewing machine, metal striking metal, light slipping through the glass, shining on the old sewing machine my mother left behind. I placed my hand on the table raw, honest, H-stitch. Each edge of fabric reminded me where I began from my mother's hands. From those pencil-scented sketches. In the afternoon, I jogged around the Hawthorne district. Inhale. Exhale. No more fear. Only steady footsteps. At night, I brewed Earl Grey tea and opened the window to Portland lighting up. I wrote in my notebook, I am learning to listen to myself more than I listen to the world. On the 3rd day after the trial, the news exploded. The papers showed Sophie leaving a convenience store, eyes red from crying. Liam was fired from the finance firm where he had taken temporary work. And then they came to me. Not everyone deserves to step back into your life. Nadine and Gregory stood at my door, holding a bag of pastries as if trying to prove a late apology. Elise, we're family. You can't just stay silent like this. I opened the door, stood there, looked at them. No anger. No pain. Just emptiness. Family is not a place that creates wounds and then expects others to forget them. I said softly. I stayed silent because I didn't want to fight anymore. But I also don't want to go back. I closed the door. Not harshly, but decisively. Behind it. I heard them sigh. Then walk away. Silence, sometimes it is the clearest refusal. On Friday morning, I woke without the sound of ringing phones. No. New messages. And no accusatory emails. Only the sound of birds at the window. Portland was as bright as a blank sheet of paper. Sometimes silence is an escape. It's a way of returning to yourself. I made tea and opened the window wide. The breeze carried the lavender scent from the small pot I had placed there the day before. I opened a brand new notebook and wrote the first line I am starting over without needing anyone's apology. And for the first time in years, my chest felt light. No more pretending. No, more enduring. Just me. Me and the new life unfolding. That afternoon, while I was folding a few new fabric samples, there was a very soft sound near the front door. Someone had slipped an envelope under the crack. No knock. No doorbell. Just left it and disappeared. I picked it up. No sender name. No logo. No postage mark. Just a plain white envelope. I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, with one sentence written in black ink. They haven't told you everything yet. My hand froze. My breath shortened. Not fear, but instinct. Another secret was waiting. Another truth darker than betrayal. I thought silence was the ending, but it turns out it was only the beginning of the next truth. I stood at my front door, the white envelope in my hand. My heartbeat pounding as if someone had knocked directly against my chest. Inside was a thin sheet of paper, containing only one sentence, written in sharp, cold black ink. They haven't told you everything yet. I read it once, then a second time, then a third. The corner of the paper was slightly creased. The mark of a hurried hand. The handwriting slanted gently familiar. Too familiar. I held it near the window. The Portland light filtered through the mist outside, making the letters look as if they were trembling. No sender name. No logo. No postal mark. Just that sentence. One sentence powerful enough to pull an entire storm of the past back into the present. I inhaled deeply. If someone wanted to warn me, it meant I hadn't seen the full surface of this iceberg. The truth doesn't knock on your door. It leaves signs for those brave enough to open it. I grabbed my coat, held the envelope, and drove straight to Maya's office. Maya was sitting behind her desk, warm yellow light reflecting off her glasses, making her look both sharp and weary. I placed the envelope on the table. This was left in front of my house. I said. Maya lifted the paper and read it slowly, very slowly. By the time she reached the end, she set it down and stayed silent. A different kind of silence. Not my silence, but the silence of someone withholding something. Maya, I asked, my voice rough. What is it that I don't know? She removed her glasses. Elise, I wasn't going to say anything yet, because I didn't think you were ready. My heart tightened. There was once a witness. Maya continued. Someone who was on your side. Someone who knew the truth. A lot of truth. But they withdrew their statement at the last minute. I leaned forward. Maya shook her head. If I tell you, it will hurt. But you deserve to know. Sometimes the quietest person knows the most. Maya led me to an old office building where years of untouched legal archives were stored. The smell of damp paper mixed with rotting wood made my skin prickle. We walked deeper until we stopped in front of a rust-colored cabinet. On it, a dusty file box, labeled Hartman, Private. He swallowed hard. My mother's name, Maya Nottet. I found it after she passed, but I didn't know when would be the right moment to give it to you. I opened the lid. Inside were a stack of handwritten notes in my mother's script, a strange invoice from a law office I'd never heard of, a small silver key, cold and heavy, like the weight of the entire past. I picked up the key. What does Mom want me to find? If your mother left clues, she wanted you to find them. The next document made my whole body turn cold. Maya placed a file on the table. A temporary asset authorization request, Hartman House. Requester Nadine Price. Temporary approver, Gregory Hartman. Date filed 5 months before my 18th birthday. My stomach twisted. This means they were planning to transfer the property before I was old enough to inherit it, I asked. My voice shaking. Maya Nottet. Elise. What they did wasn't impulsive. This was a long-term scheme. I turned page after page. Each page was another knife. Nadine wanted authority to sign documents on my behalf. Gregory stayed silent, standing behind her, enabling everything without leaving public traces. It wasn't Sophie who started all of this. It wasn't Liam who began the betrayal. The origin was here, in these yellowed sheets. Betrayal didn't start with Sophie. It began long before that. A note from my mother slipped out when I turned the file. Her handwriting was soft and slightly slanted, just like the nights she used to draw for me. Not everyone in this house loves you the way you think. He stood still. My neck felt hot, as if someone had lit a match behind me. Memories flashed by like an old film reel, my mother locking a drawer, placing a key in my hand, and saying that exact sentence. Back then, I thought she was afraid I'd get hurt during my teenage years. A vague warning from a gentle mother. Now I understood. She saw what I was too young to see. Nadine stepped into my life not with love, but with a mission, and my father stood there and allowed it. My mother's vague words suddenly became a compass. At the bottom of the box, I found a tiny object taped to the back of the cardboard. A micro SD card. I handed it to Maya. We hurried to the desk and plugged it into the laptop. A single audio file appeared. Maya clicked it open. Static crackled. Then, Nadine's voice. She's too trusting. Once she signs everything, we'll handle the rest. My hand jerked back from the keyboard as if I'd touched electricity. A faint laugh, Gregory's laugh. Then the file ended. No conclusion. No explanation. Just silence. Maya looked at me. Elise, this is evidence they can't deny. I closed my eyes, inhaling deeply. Not pain, not fear, but realization. The true betrayer never showed their face in court, but this recording will drag them into the light. I didn't bring anger with me, only the truth. Maya walked beside me as we entered the small conference room at the law office. Nadine was already sitting there, her back unnaturally straight, as if she still had some authority left to cling to. Gregory kept his head down, looking like an old stone waiting to crack. I placed the memory card on the table, pressed play. Nadine's voice spilled out, cold and sharp as a blade. She's too trusting. Once she signs everything, we'll handle the rest. Then came Gregory's low, broken laugh. Nadine turned pale. Gregory clenched his jaw but didn't dare lift his head. I looked at them, the people who once called me family. Now they were just two hollow beings facing the consequences of what they created. I didn't come for an apology. I said slowly, I came to tell you I've seen everything. Maya placed another stack of documents on the table. Asset authorization forms, lawyer invoices, failed transfer receipts. My hands no longer trembled. I wasn't afraid anymore. It's not that I became stronger, it's that I stopped being afraid. Nadine tried to open her mouth, but I raised my hand. Don't, I said. An apology now would only make things worse. Gregory swallowed hard. Elise, we are family. You stayed silent when they did this to me. I cut him off. And silence is also a form of complicity. I pushed the chair back and stood up. From today onward, what remains between us is only legal boundaries. No family. No obligations. No history. Maya handed them the official documents. Restricted contact. No access to Hartman House. Waiver of all claims. Nadine exhaled sharply, a sound carrying the collapse of decades of scheming. The only thing left between us, I said, turning away, is distance. Forgiveness does not mean opening the door for them to return. That Portland morning was strangely beautiful. The sky was clear, as if the universe knew I had just walked through a heavy chapter. I returned to Hartman House. The house that once held shadows was now full of sunlight. I opened every window, letting the breeze carry lavender through the rooms. I opened my mother's file box one last time. The silver key lay among the papers, small, cold, but bright like a blessing. I placed it on the table beside my mother's sketchbook, then opened a new page. I wrote the first line of my next collection, untangled, free from the knots of the past. I looked around the room, old sketches. Soft golden sunlight. Steam rising from a cup of tea. Everything whispered the same thing: I was free. Some chapters don't need to be slammed shut. You just need to walk away. That evening, I turned on the camera. No makeup, No script. Just me and the truth. I spent years trying to hold on to a family that didn't want to hold on to me. I said softly. And today, I understand. Sometimes leaving is the only way to stay with yourself. I looked straight into the lens. If you ever have to choose peace over toxic family ties, you're not wrong. You're just choosing to live. I smiled, a real smile. Not a forced one. Please like and subscribe to the channel so I can share more meaningful and beautiful stories with you. And share your thoughts about this story below, because your voice truly matters.